Jeff Slauson here from 19 News Now at the 19 News Digital Desk. Another year, another issue with the districting maps for the political maps here in the state of Ohio. The House and the Senate maps are currently in flux. So essentially every 10 years when the new census comes in and determines and shows us exactly where the percentages of the population are living, we redistrict in the state. Not mandatory, but it does help because you can understand exactly where certain populations are and how to change the way that the maps are to evenly distribute across the state. Well, that's been a problem over the last year. There was a redistricting commission that submitted 5 different proposals last year, and all 5 of them were deemed unconstitutional by the state Supreme Court. How exactly can they be unconstitutional? Well, breaking it down very simply, it's essentially gerrymandering around the state to not ensure equality for both parties. So basically not giving equal opportunity for both parties and for people that live there. You don't want to just center around one district for one party and the rest for another. That was the problem. 5 different attempts, all of them were shut down. Now we have a new meeting of this commission. That will be on September 13th. September 22nd is when the Secretary of State has said they need to have a map submitted. That's most likely not enough time. So what I'm going to do right now is I've done 2 interviews over the past couple hours here. One of them is with Nikki Antonio, a state senator who is actually going to be a new addition to the commission, talking about what this could mean and how we could get to a point where potentially we do get a map. And then we have a political expert who will break down if that's at all possible.
Very short window because at the end of the year, candidates have to file to run next year because elections will be up in both the House and the Senate. And so it's really important that we bring the committee together and hopefully work very effectively and efficiently to get this done as soon as possible.
The commission is predominantly Republican, is that correct?
Yes.
Are you the lone Democrat, or are there others?
No, there's myself and Leader Russo from the House. So there's a representative, there's a Republican and a Democrat respectively from the House and the Senate. And then there are the statewide seats of the Secretary of State, the governor, and the auditor.
So with that being very weighted, at least one part to the other,
yes.
The question I'm getting at is, how are we going to get to a point where it is deemed constitutional?
Well, my hope is that many of these office holders went through the process. They were part of the commission last time, and I think it was frustrating for everyone. Certainly it was confusing and frustrating for the public, but I think it was also frustrating for the members of the commission. And my hope is that starting fresh, coming in, but also knowing that there's a clock ticking, that we'll be able to arrive at some reasonable compromise. It's also on the tail end of issue 1 just passing in August, and I think one of the things that's in the climate right now is that the people of the state of Ohio are watching what policymakers are doing. They're paying attention, and so I don't think anybody can assume anything but that as we go into this redistricting process. And the people have already said what they wanted. They want people to work together. They want policymakers to work together in a bipartisan way. They want them to work towards solutions. And the people have spoken time and time again and said they want fair maps. And so that's what we need to do.
2 weeks now, or 3 weeks, whatever it is, and then you'll be meeting on this, and we'll probably be trying to talk to you again about it. The last question that I do have for you, for those that are concerned about this process and are fearful that something will not get done, what do you have to say to people like that?
Well, I think reach out to the people who represent you, reach out to the leadership in both the House and the Senate, to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, and let them know that as a citizen in the state of Ohio, you want to see this resolved in a fair way and a quick way as well.
Senator Antonio, anything else that we didn't touch on that we should have?
No, I think the only thing I'll say is the last thing I'll say is that I think it's incumbent upon the policymakers on this commission to get this done quickly and effectively and fairly, because the people in the state of Ohio deserve that as well.
So, where does this take us from here now? And how likely is it that this is actually going to happen, as she says? Let's get to our political analyst here. We've spoken to him many times, and for those that have seen our coverage, Jonathan Enton, professor at Case Western Reserve University, a law professor, has been a great resource to have. He breaks that down in an in-depth conversation.
We are where we are because we had a train wreck in redistricting last year. We did not get lawful maps for either the state legislature or our congressional districts. Right now, we're talking only about the legislative maps. The Redistricting Commission is going to meet in a couple of weeks and try to come up with a new set of maps that will pass legal muster under the Ohio Constitution. We don't have a lot of time for this because there are some deadlines coming up in terms of getting the district lines drawn, allowing people who want to run to know where their district lines are going to be. And also, just based on what we know from last year, you have to build in a certain amount of time for litigation, because every map that the state came up with last year was challenged in the Ohio Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that they all were inconsistent with the Ohio Constitution. So, as I said, right now we're talking about the legislative maps. The congressional map is on a different track. We can talk about that if you want, but the immediate concern is the legislative maps.
These maps in particular, you mentioned how they were shut down last year, deemed unconstitutional. What would be able to be seen as constitutional? What makes one of these maps constitutional?
Well, the Ohio Constitution sets up a variety of criteria relating to having maps that are likely to result in a legislature that reflects generally the statewide popular vote. But to get there, the amendment, or the Ohio Constitution also places limits on how the lines can be drawn in order to minimize the extent to which you break up communities or counties, and also in order to try to encourage some degree of bipartisan cooperation. The Ohio Constitution says that a map that will be good for a full decade after a national census has to get some buy-in from both the majority party and the minority party. And last time around, we didn't get any bipartisanship on either the legislative maps or the congressional maps. It remains to be seen how much bipartisanship we will get this time. There are a couple of things to think about here. One is we have some new members of the Redistricting Commission who were not at the table last time, and so they might bring a somewhat different perspective than their predecessors did. But we also have to keep in mind a couple of political realities. One is that the Republicans now have very large majorities in both houses of the legislature, and so many Republican incumbents who are eligible to seek another term might put some pressure on their leaders to try to come up with a map that protects their ability to get reelected. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that the Ohio Supreme Court is a little bit different now than it was last year. Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who was a Republican, had to leave office at the end of last year because there are age limits for members of the Supreme Court. Chief Justice O'Connor sided with the Democratic justices on the court to strike down the maps last year. Well, she's gone, and so although there was a 4-3 majority on the court for Republicans last time, Chief Justice O'Connor sided with the Democrats on those maps. There's still a 4-3 majority on the Ohio Supreme Court, but it doesn't look like any of the four who are now on the court are going to take the same kind of position that Chief Justice O'Connor took. And it's possible that the Republican members of the Redistricting Commission will take a kind of hard-nosed position on the theory that maybe the court is more favorably inclined to the Republicans than last year's court was, and they might be willing to take their chances on having a map that is more favorable to the Republicans, and hope that the majority of the Ohio Supreme Court will uphold that sort of map. Now, I don't know how things are likely to go. I do know that the three continuing Republican justices all dissented in the cases last year. We don't know what the new Republican justice, Justice Dieters, is going to do, but he may well be the swing vote on whatever litigation we get on this year's legislative maps.
You had mentioned earlier the time frame that we're working under. The maps don't necessarily matter, at least right now, but they matter for next year. So hypothetically, what happens if they figure out a couple of these maps, they submit them to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court keeps saying these are unconstitutional?
Well, the reason we have more imminent deadlines is because the primary for state legislative seats is going to take place next March. A lot of things have to happen between the time that the map is adopted and the ballots get printed. We have to know what the lines are so that candidates can make sure that they are living in the district they want to represent. They also need to know the lines because they have to circulate nominating petitions. And there are legal requirements about having the petitions in and verified a certain amount of time before the primary. And also we have to have these things resolved because of early voting, absentee voting, things like that. So even though we're talking about a primary election in March of 24, that's actually not a lot of time to get all of those things done. Now, one possibility is what we saw last year, which is, as I said, we had a train wreck. And so we wound up having separate primaries. We had a later primary for legislative seats because the legislative map wasn't in place in time for all of the things that had to happen by the regular date. So if these deadlines slip, the legislature may find itself under real pressure to move the primary or, again, to divide the primary. Nobody seems to think that was a great idea, and maybe the prospect of having to run two primaries or move the whole process back will put some pressure on the Redistricting Commission to try to come up with a map that would pass legal muster.
It's just crazy to think that we are now doing this again here. It's just like a pushed off deadline essentially that happened where, okay, we had this one that was tentatively set, which was, the first one was set, or the one that we are currently using was set by the Supreme Court. Is that right?
No, the map The map that we used for the current legislative districts was actually adopted by the Redistricting Commission. Now, the court said that that map did not meet legal requirements, but at the same time, there wasn't another map. And so the court said, in 2022, when we vote for the legislature, we're going to vote using this map because we have to have a map. But this is a one-off. We are not going to use this map after 2022. In fact, if we were talking about, if we were in a federal court under federal law and the Redistricting Commission failed to come up with a map, the federal court would have the authority to draw its own map. And what that means is the court would hire outside experts to draw the map. But Ohio law forbids the Supreme Court from drawing maps. All the Supreme Court can say is that the map, whatever map is before us, either passes constitutional muster or it doesn't. If the answer is the map fails the legal test, then it has to go back to the Redistricting Commission to come up with one that will pass muster. And a lot of what we're dealing with now is that, last year we were dealing with a new system for drawing maps that was supposed to discourage partisan gerrymandering and encourage bipartisan cooperation. For whatever reason, it didn't work last year. The question is whether now, given the embarrassment from last year, whether maybe this process can work better this time around. Meanwhile, of course, we have a proposed constitutional amendment in the works that would replace the current system with an independent redistricting commission. But even if we get that onto the ballot, that's not going to get there until November of next year at the earliest. It may take longer. So right now, we have to work with the system that we have.
And that system probably going to take a while to get to the bottom up. All right. Much more on this story and many others tonight on 19 News at 10 and 11. For now, I'm Jeff Sloss with 19 News. Have a great day and great night. Much more to come, both on air and on our website at cleveland19.com.
19 News, now streaming on Samsung Smart TV. Search for channel 1035.